What's up, guys? I'm Uncle Freedom, coming to you before I go to work on the same day. Notice the same SAF tax hoodie. Today we're going to talk about Volume 2 in the How Does It Fail After SHTF, and this is medical issues and mental issues. Bigger deal than people realize, not for some of the reasons people think, but history has shown us this is kind of how this works. The vast majority of people that take any kind of a regular medication that is not over the counter, right? So you have your guys that are in pain management, you have your cancer patients, people that have like stomach issues, heart issues. They will typically have somewhere between 2 weeks and about 90 days of that medication on hand at any given point, because 90-day scripts exist. But depending on whether or not power is lost in this environment, are vulnerable populations. Now, I consider a vulnerable population that has to have frequent and necessary medical intervention in order to maintain a normal life of some kind. That is, and so kind of like one of the best ones for this example is a diabetic, right? An insulin-dependent diabetic, your insulin has to be kept typically in a refrigerator. If you lose power, your insulin loses its efficacy once it drops below the recommended storage temperature, meaning you don't have 90 days. You might have 40. And the vulnerable populations fall victim first to this. So like I said, these are people that require constant and frequent medical intervention. They are basically on a clock the second it starts. And now we're talking about not just your diabetics, but people with massive, big time heart conditions, kidney dialysis, diabetes, chemo, to name a couple, right? People that require constant, frequent medical intervention in order to maintain some form of a normal life. The clock starts the day this begins. So let's look at our timeline, because there's not a lot to go over on medical stuff except the timeline, right? Everybody understands medicine good, not have medicine ends bad, right? So 24 to 96 hours. People who require CMI or constant medical intervention to live are going to start having issues, right? This could be your grandma. People like to think of this in some abstract terms. I don't do that. I'm going to tell you real life, that could be your grandma, right? Could be your friend's kid. But that's real life, right? Real life doesn't care about your feelings, right? It's completely just there. Along with this, we can add in the people that are at the end of their medication cycle, right? So guys that have debilitating chronic pain, this took place, they only had like 8-9 days, they only had 3 days left because they were due for a refill, right? Well, if the computer systems went down, they're not getting a refill. So now we have people in crippling, debilitating pain, which creates desperation, right? But we'll get there. What about at 120 to 168 hours, right? So 5 days, roughly in there, 5 to 7 days. Medically dependent people that required, again, CMI or constant medical intervention outside of their community, which means if you live in a spot, but you would typically have to drive an hour away to a bigger city with a hospital to get your kidney dialysis, for example, right? Those people are going to start failing in health because they can't go to that city an hour away because of the way the situation is unfolded. This is also the time where we will start seeing people rob pharmacies. Remember, I said we'd get there just a second ago, right? You've created desperation in a guy that's in chronic pain. How does a guy fix chronic pain? If he can't get his stuff the normal way, he goes and gets it the way he can get it, which would be theft, right? So this is where we start seeing pharmacies get broken into. Pharmacies, regardless of what people's popular belief is and what the news media would show you at places like Katrina, people still stupid shit. Like they walk through waist deep water holding a big screen TV because I'm going to have this when the water goes that way, right? Like this happens. I watched it take place. But people also rob things like pharmacies, gun stores, right? Like that takes place because what's worth more money? Your TV that you are walking through waist deep water to get back to your apartment without dropping it? Or a whole buttload of a good schedule narcotic, right? Like, because in addition to it just being needed for people to survive medically, people get high on this crap, right? Like everyone would agree that this country has an opioid epidemic. It's a real thing, right? This happened because everybody got prescribed happy, and they were like, you get an opioid, you get an opioid. And what happened was we created addiction in people that had never been addicted to anything. It's a sad reality, but it took place, and people are still dealing with that to this day. So there's a really big jump from here. So we're going to go away from that 5 to 7 days window, but now we're going to talk about 28 days. So we're talking about the end of people that had a month worth of prescription, right? The gloves are going to come off. The gloves come off immediately when we start getting close to this. Almost all medically dependent citizens are either sick or dying at this point. Medicine is, in fact, causing violence because, as I mentioned in the first one, as we started going, people in severe pain become desperate to stop pain. People that are addicts become desperate to feed addiction, right? This is all a medical and medicine issue. This is not a law and order issue. This is a medical and medicine issue, right? Because if they weren't addicted to these things, they wouldn't have the issue that causes them to do the stupid thing that they're doing, right? So it's effectively causing violence at a high level. And I want you to think something else. I mentioned earlier we could be talking about juvenile diabetes cases, right? What wouldn't you do as a parent to stop your child suffering, right? What would you give to give your kid one more dose of insulin, even though you know it won't ultimately make a difference, right? You bought a day. What wouldn't you give for that day? Good people do really bad things. It is a fact. It happens. And a lot of times it happens because of stuff like this. This is also about that point where all of those people who had mental health issues but were currently medicated, the meds are running out and the more severe issues in mental illness are causing huge problem. I'm trying to think of a really nice way to put this. People don't grasp how many people are on mental breakdown medication, right? So violent schizophrenic people are on medications or shots that eliminate the voices in their head that make them do bad things. If you remove that, because here's the other part of it, and people don't like to talk about this, but I spent a lot of time working in the mental health arena too, not just as law enforcement, social work. People don't like taking medication that alters the way they feel, right? So if a guy hearing 5 people talking to him, he probably has names for them at this point. If you give him medication that makes him feel different and the voices stop, the fact that he feels different will drive him insane and he will stop taking his medication, which is the reason we see this all the time in law enforcement, right? This pendulum swings back and forth all the time. Johnny's on medication, Johnny feels a little better, Johnny stops taking the medication because the voices went away, and now the voices are back and we're dealing with violent Johnny again, right? We get him back to a hospital, he takes his medication, he swings over here, the voices stop, he thinks he's better, he stops taking the medication, swings back over here. This happens all the time. You eliminate the accountability system that we have for medication and doctors and providing it this, in about 30 days, you are going to have people that are violently fighting people that don't exist. Like, it happens, man. It's real life. It takes place, and people die because of it. And not because of the mental illness, but because the voice told them to do something, or they were so whacked out of their brain with the voices or whatever was telling them, the psychosis they had, that they broke into a house and got smoked for it. It happens all the time. We're talking about removing the safeguards that keep it somewhat in check, which would lead us to 120 days. So now we're basically we're 4 months in. We're a third of the way. Everything's wrong at this point. The world is a much different place, but we're talking about the medical necessity aspect. You will start to see the reemergence of things like dysentery, right? Things that have long been not a problem start showing up as society fails. You know why that takes place? It's probably not a lot of the reasons you think. It's caused by rampant untreated disease, or rampant untreated bacteria, more or less, right? That is caused by dead bodies or E. coli in a water system. That's a friendly thing at this point, right? But this stuff happens. Water systems get tainted, food becomes tainted. You have just the bacteria from no trash pickup, right? People take things for granted in our modern world, right? Like, somebody picks up your trash once a week. If that stops, you now have rotting food creating bacteria. That bacteria contaminates things, right? And this that is caused by death. But the other side of this is not just death. It's just a general lack of cleanliness to begin with. That's where all these weird diseases that we don't have a problem with, that's how they show back up again. Like, what do you mean we have this problem in a modern society? Well, it's because we're not a modern society anymore, and like trash isn't being taken away, and like that dead dude's been over there rotting for like a week. So now we have these diseases that we thought long eradicated, but because we created the conditions for them to exist again, they are now a new problem that we can't actually deal with. The scariest part of all of this, though, is I don't believe people grasp how fast and the absolute volume of people dying is. Like, we're talking about a scenario that could lead day to day to 15 to 20 people dying in a town that has 3,000 people. That's a lot of people to just lights out day to day, right? But it's going to happen. Not to mention the overwhelming amount of medically dependent mental issues that exist out there. Now, I'm not saying all of those issues are issues, right? Like, Johnny's ADD is not a problem after this. Violent psychosis and paranoid schizophrenia can be a problem, right? Because you can't reason with them anymore. Like, you're not going to talk your way through this situation. This dude is being told by 8 other people, you're bad. You're not going to convince him you're not bad, right? It's a new problem. The issues that can be created by this are unimaginable to your normal people, right? I can't even put them all on paper. But the best way I can describe it is, one day a guy that you've known for 10 years, who's been a great guy and he's got kids, his medication is now gone. And he is basically standing in your doorway with a machete because 3 things that are talking to him are telling him you're the devil. You are not going to snap him out of it. It is a real life situation that you are going to have to deal with. I dealt with guys in social work, guys that had people talking to them that taped their vents up, that were chasing imaginary people down hallways with hammers. It happens. That took place in North Platte. It's a real thing. Medical issues and mental issues is not just about the initial scary parts, which are people dying from things like diabetes. You know, your loved one's passing away or your kid passing away because you can't get that. There's a really scary part to this. Outside of the heartbreaking part of it, there's a terrifying part to it as well. So guys, this has been medical issues and mental illness issues post SHTF with our timeline as we've looked at it. So now if you go back to thinking about the way I talked about the violence standard in the first video, the fighting you would have to do in the second video, food and water, and now this, the next one's going to be law and lawlessness. That one's going to really jack some people up. Somebody's going to get mad at it, but I don't care because it's real life. It happens. And it will happen again. If we ever see anything like this, it's just human nature. And we have followed the exact same playbook every time. So guys, I am Uncle Freedom. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. Hopefully you enjoyed this. And until next time, I'll see you later.